What if Henry Wallace stayed as veep and became president in 1945? In this timeline, Henry Wallace doesn't get nominated for vice president. But in this timeline, Henry Wallace does get nominated for vice president, and after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death, Henry Wallace becomes president. The atomic bombs. Does it happen? Yes. Henry Wallace does still drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And like in real life, Harry Truman does it to save the lives of millions of both Japanese and Americans, which would have kept on fighting otherwise. And Wallace does that same thing. No Cold War. Wallace believes in peaceful coexistence and views society's security context as illegal immunity, opposing the get-uts policies Truman adopted. He likely would have pushed a couple relationship with Stalin, potentially avoiding the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and NATO in historical forms. Post-war, Germany, Europe. President Wallace would likely have opposed the division of Germany and provided economic assistance to the Soviet Union to aid in reconstruction, attempting to bring them back into the Western Sphere. China and communists. Wallace likely would have written off China King Khan, seen naturalist. Government in China applied Marco to Tong's victory. He would have likely have opposed them. American support for French communist introduction, potentially avoiding the Vietnam War. Expansion of the New Deal. Wallace would have pushed for very liberal domestic policies. Including national health insurance, massive influx projects, and a football on 60 million jobs for returning veterans. Civil rights. Wallace was far more progressive on race than Truman. He likely would have pushed for deregulation of the Army Force and Veterans Act against lunch much easier, likely by 1946. Education and economy. With his background as Secretary of Agriculture to Roosevelt, before being fired by Truman as he talked trash about Truman's foreign policy, and none of that ever happened, Wallace would have championed agricultural reforms, science farming, and strong peace support while maintaining wartime economic controls longer than Truman to preserve influence. Southern opposer. The Southern Democrat Dixiecrats wing would likely have opposite Wallace civil rights and pro-labor stance even more vehemently than they did to Truman. Yes, Truman, but likely causing a full party to fracture by like late to early or mid 1946 or whatever. 1948 U.S.A. election. Wallace, Waiiace, Dewey, Warren. Historically, debates whether Wallace could have won re-election in 1948. Many believe that if Stalin violent agreed, which was probably Wallace's soft stance, or have caused a massive black ash, allowing a Republican candidate Thomas Dewey or Robert Taft to win in 1948. But will the Republicans win in 1948? The answer is no. Henry Wallace wins re-election in 1948. Just barely. 288 electoral votes, but dominating the popular vote with 59%. the Red Scar. The paranoia and McCarthyism of the late 1940s might have been avoided, or significantly lesser, as Wallace would have dominated the anti-communist appearance of the federal government. Unhumanly, a Wallace presidency would have likely been more higher stakes evolving to prevent the Cold War in a second term. Trust flew the agriculture, cities agriculture. He argued that he was too native regulation to Stalin, while believing he would have avoided detonates of nuclear Brightman ships. The Korean War, does it still happen? There was no Korea War. Like in real life, Truman just calls the Korean War a, quote, police action. 1952 U.S.A. election. Station Taft vs. Wallace Barkley. Hayward Stassen destroys his own campaign, and Henry Wallace is able to get re-elected. 1956 U.S.A. election. Kennedy Johnson vs. Goldwater Station. Yes. John F. Kennedy easily wins in 1956. There is still a recession at the end of 1950s, but other than that, JFK is still very popular. 1960 U.S.A. election. Eisenhower Romney vs. Kennedy Johnson. This one's gonna be close. It's a tough race, but John F. Kennedy is able to win re-election in 1960. John F. Kennedy doesn't sign the Civil Rights Act in 1964 because he doesn't use LBJ's understanding of the Senate to break the filibuster, and it's also possible that the Food Stamp Act of 1964 would also likely be stalled too. Many people are getting very exhausted of Democratic dominance. 1964 U.S.A. election. Johnson Humphrey vs. Goldwater Millard. Barry Goldwater is too radical to become president, and the Johnson campaign was able to make him look like a fool, and Lyndon B. Johnson was able to win. As like I said, with the Wallace presidency, it seems that the Vietnam War has been avoided. 1968 U.S.A. election. Nixon Agnew vs. Kennedy Muskie. Well, Richard Nixon is able to win 1968 fairly easily. Watergate or something else? There was no Watergate scandal. Like in real life, the Watergate scandal forces Richard Nixon to resign on August 19th, 1974. But there was no Watergate scandal, so Nixon runs a relatively clean administration. 1972 U.S.A. election. Nixon Agnew vs. Mondale Wallace. Richard Nixon is able to win re-election with 392 electoral votes. Again, there was no Watergate scandal, so he doesn't resign in 1974. 1976 Republican primaries. Spiro Agnew, Gerald Ford, and Richard Nixon. Ronald Reagan would become the nominee, with Richard Schweineuer as his running mate. 1976 Democratic primaries. George Wallace, Ted Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, and Walter Mondale, and Geraldine Ferraro, all hoping to become the Democratic nominee. Walter Mondale would become the Democratic nominee with Jimmy Carter. 1976 U.S.A. election. Reagan Swinell vs. Carter Mondale. Ronald Reagan is able to win 1976 fairly and relatively easily. The hostage Iran crisis goes horribly wrong. None of the hostage Iran crisis are able to get freed. Oh, and there was also a terrible economy, as both Nixon and Reagan had to deal with stagflation, and due to Nixon handling stagflation very poorly, is why Reagan is criticized for it. 1980 U.S.A. election. Kennedy Mondale vs. Reagan Swinell. Ted Kennedy is able to win 1980 with 300 electoral votes. Kennedy's first term. Good economy. End of the recession. End of stagflation. The hostage crisis are freed. 1984 U.S.A. election. Anderson Bush vs. Kennedy Mondale. Ted Kennedy gets reelected in 1984 relatively easily with 319 electoral votes. 1984 U.S.A. election. Clinton Gore vs. Bush Quayle. In a narrow victory, the Republicans could have secured the White House, but Bill Clinton was able to win with 288 electoral votes, as the Clinton-Gore campaign was able to win. Does Bill Clinton raise his taxes? Like in real life, George H.W. Bush raises taxes and gets very unpopular for that. But Bill Clinton doesn't raise his taxes at all. The population of Desert Storm. There was no population of Desert Storm. Bill Clinton wants a good administration for now, until the Persian Gulf War, what goes differently. The Persian Gulf War does go horribly wrong, but Bill Clinton is still popular. In 1992, the Republicans won Ross Perot, and Ross Perot would nominate Jack Kemp. Ross Perot have a lot of ideas, such as only giving rights to women, and continuing on Reagan's policies, which many people don't like because of Reagan's unpopularity. Many people are confused about why Ross Perot only wants rights for women, and many people are happy with Bill Clinton's presidency anyways. 1992 U.S.A. election. Perot Kemp vs. Clinton Gore. Bill Clinton easily wins re-election in 1992. The Persian Gulf War would finally come to an end within about 1998 or something like that. Anyway, 1996 U.S. election. Gore Lieberman vs. Bush Rumsfeld. Al Gore is able to easily win 1996. The Yukon Trade War. Well, the youth survival war doesn't happen in this timeline. Although many people are already feeling the events of the Yukon Summer War. In 1996, Republicans go with Newt Gingrich, and Newt Gingrich would nominate George W. Bush. But Newt Gingrich is seen as a worse version than W. Bush for his support of Yukon-Treva, thinking that it should have happened. 1996 U.S.A. election. Gingrich W. Bush vs. Gore Lieberman. Al, Al Gore easily wins re-election in 2000 with 379 electoral votes. 9/11, does it still happen? 9/11 does still happen. But Osama bin Laden doesn't get captured. The 2004 tsunami, yes, it still happens. But however, the Democrats face the problem of voter frauds. And all across the 2000s, they're doomed. 2004 U.S.A. election, W. Bush Cheney vs. Biden Obama. George W. Bush is able to win 2004 decisively with 303 electoral votes. Osama bin Laden would get hunted down in like late 2006. The Democrats do win the 2006 midterms, but they're still incredibly popular. But he has no response to the 2006 Hurricane Katrina, taking the lives of 172,000 people. 2008 U.S.A. election, W. Bush Rumsfeld vs. Clinton Obama. George W. Bush wins re-election with 286 electoral votes. The 2008 recession would later happen in 2011. A small scandal to the George W. Bush presidency. 2008 Republican primaries. Donald Rumsfeld, Donald Trump, Dick Cheney, and Sarah Palin. The Republicans would nominate Dick Cheney, the former vice president to George W. Bush, and he would go with Sarah Palin as his running mate. 2008 Democratic primaries. Howard Dean, scream situation never happened. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, Joe Biden. Barack Obama, winner. Hillary Clinton, runner-up. Joe Biden, third place. Howard Dean, fourth place. Chris Dodd, fifth place. John Edwards dropped out after the scandal involving with her cheating on his wife Elizabeth. Joe Lieberman also dropped out. Barack Obama would choose Hillary Clinton. 2008 U.S.A. election, Cheney Palin vs. Obama Clinton. Barack Obama easily wins. Barack Obama has a very good presidential term. In 2016, the Republicans go with Donald Trump, who lost the 2012 Republican primaries to Dick Cheney. 2016 U.S.A. election, Trump Pence vs. Obama Clinton. Barack Obama easily wins re-election in 2016. What about his first term? Good things, because of Obamacare, there was no COVID. Horrible things, the murder of John Floyd. 2020 Democratic primaries, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Vice President Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton. Elizabeth Warren would become the Democratic nominee with Chris Dodd. 2020 Republican primaries, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Nikki Haley, Ben Carson, and Bill Hart, who actually did run for president that year when challenging incumbent President Trump. Ted Cruz would become the Republican nominee with Marco Rubio. 2020 U.S.A. election, Rubio Cruz versus Warren Dodd. Ted Cruz is able to win 2020 relatively easily, as due to no Obamacare, both the Democrats and Republicans had a very high chances of winning the election. The Ukraine and Gaza war would still break out in 2024 U.S.A. election. Phillips Kennedy Jr. vs. Cruz Rubio. Dean Phillips is able to win 2024. 2028 U.S.A. election, Phillips Kennedy Jr. vs. Cruz Rubio. Again, Ted Cruz is able to win re-election in 2028, becoming the first president since Grover Cleveland to win 2 non-consecutive terms. 1948, Henry Wallace. 1952, Henry Wallace. 1956, John Kennedy. 1960, John Kennedy. 1964, Lyndon Johnson. 1978, Richard Nixon. 1972, Richard Nixon. 1976, Ronald Reagan. 1980, Ted Kennedy. 1984, Ted Kennedy. 1988, Bill Clinton. 1992, Bill Clinton. 1996, Al Gore. 2000, Al Gore. 2004, George W. Bush. 2008, George W. Bush. 2012, Barack Obama. 2016, Barack Obama. 2020, Ted Cruz. 2024, Dean Phillips. 2028, Ted Cruz. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.